Hi guys, welcome back to Sacred Vedic Astrology. My name is Samantha and I am a professional Vedic sidereal astrologer. So today we're going to go into a very in-depth chart analysis into one of the most popular singers of our generation and our lifetime. Someone who is really, really talented, but also struggled with a lot of addiction issues, struggled with abandonment issues with his father, which we can see in the chart, yes. And also had, a lot of this sort of, or has a lot of this sort of mysterious allure about him, which we'll see why we can get that in the chart as well, too. So we're going to go into in-depth chart analysis of the Weeknd, also known as Abel, and I feel like there was a time period in which I was so intrigued by him as a person and as an artist. Not so much anymore, not for any specific reason, but I just find him to be a really interesting person and very mysterious, right? Which is always what happens when someone has K2 aspects on their first house. Every single time when I feel this mysterious allure to someone who is a public figure, I will go and get their time of birth, and I will find that they have K2 either on their ascendant or K2 aspecting their ascendant, which is that mysterious allure that you will see in a lot of celebrities. They'll have something aspecting, or they'll have K2 aspecting their first house in their Vedic chart. So we're going to go ahead and pull up the Weeknd's Vedic sidereal astrology chart to do some really, really in-depth chart analysis. I'm going to show you guys how we can see issues with addiction, how we can see issues with an absent father, how we can see a singer, how we can see an artist, and how we can also see someone who's very mysterious and alluring and sort of private as well too. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pull up his chart as always, and I hope you guys enjoy and have fun following along. So let's get right into it. All right, guys, so let's get started. All right, so here we have Abel's charts pulled up. I never know what to call him, but I'm going to call him Abel because I think that's a really, interesting name. All right, so something that is so important to note about Abel's chart, right? Where do we see the most planetary energy active? We see the most planetary energy active in his second house of the voice and the speech, right? And he is a singer. All right, what I find very interesting about his second house is he has a mix of malefics and one powerful benefic as well too, right? So it's always interesting when that's happening because we are going to get mixed results within that house, and that might sound confusing, but I'm going to explain exactly what that means when we get more into it. Okay, so let's start here. So he is a Scorpio Lagna, which means that his first house is Scorpio. Of course he is, and of course it's in the Jyesta Nakshatra, which is this very sort of, very magnetic, alluring, sort of dark allure I've noticed when people have that Jyesta Nakshatra, and I've also seen a lot of really powerful musicians that actually have Jyesta strong in their chart as well too. So Jyesta ascendant, Scorpio ascendant, which means that his first house lord goes into his second house. So means that his entire chart is getting ruled by the second house. What is the second house? The second house is the voice. The second house is speech. Second house is money. The second house is, our face, our image. And we see that he has Venus, Saturn in a really, really tight conjunction in the second house. And then we see Mars in the second as well too. So we have two malefic energies and one benefic energy in the second house. And I'll explain how this is all unfolded and manifested, right? Because it's not one or the other. It's not, oh, it's a positive second house fully, or oh, it's a fully negative second house. It's actually both things, okay? So the ancient Vedic texts will tell you that malefics in the second house will cause addiction issues, okay? It's a really classic sort of Vedic principle that if you are a Vedic astrologer, you know about. And I have found it to be very true in charts that I analyze. It's pretty rare for me to use a lot of Vedic scripture if I don't feel like it works, right? I only use things in astrology if it works because that's just how it has to be. You're never going to be a good astrologer if you are just going by ancient texts and not actually using principles based on how well they work, right? That's what being a good astrologer is being accurate, okay? So we see that he has 2 malefics in his second house, which that would show addiction issues, okay? His whole, first sort of half of his artistry and his artistic career was all about songs, about addiction and drug use and escaping into alcohol, drugs, substances, okay? That is those 2 malefic energies sitting in the second house. We have Mars in the second, we have Saturn in the second. If we see, prominent malefics in the second house, people will have to be warned about addiction issues. Okay, that's just how it goes. And we also see Venus there as well too. So we see 1 benefic, 2 malefics. So the malefic energy in this chart is manifesting in the sense that he did have a lot of addiction issues, right? The second house is what we ingest, okay? He's also had some, probably, I'm sure, I don't know about this actually, but he probably had some issues with speaking when he was younger as well too. When I see a lot of malefics in the second house, it will show that someone had some sort of issue in their upbringing or in their life around their speech, okay? So interestingly enough, even though he's a singer and a really talented singer, because that's Venus in the second, which gives beauty in the voice, right? We also see Saturn, we also see Mars, so there was definitely issues with his speech growing up. Maybe he was really quiet, maybe he didn't like to talk a lot, maybe he had some sort of speech impediment. Things like that will manifest when we see some malefics in the second house as well too. Okay, we see Venus with Saturn in a very, very tight conjunction. So Saturn will often key the career. So when Saturn is really, really close to a planet, it can show that that is connected to someone's career, right? And Venus is creativity. So his career is very creative. And we also see Mars there. So we see a Mars-Venus conjunction. It's not the tightest conjunction that I've seen at all, right? Venus is at 28 degrees. Mars is at 19 degrees. That's not a really close planetary conjunction, but best believe that we're still going to feel the energy. So Venus-Mars is a classic conjunction in astrology that is a creative conjunction. It will show people that are creatively talented, people that are interested in the arts. Performers, singers, songwriters, artists are often seen with Venus-Mars in the same sign in the same house, and it's also in the second house of his voice, right? So he was quite literally a singer, okay? Also, Mars-Venus will show that he probably speaks and can be very Venusian in his speech, and then he can also be very Mars-like in his speech. So I have this conjunction, it's in my second house as well too, and with Venus in the second, there's times we can be very soft-spoken, very poetic. They say Venus in the second will create a poet. I happen to write poetry, and obviously Abel is a songwriter, which I would kind of see as a poet, right? Venus in the second gives poetic talent, okay? But then we see Mars there, so he also probably has a temper in his speech as well too, right? So it's both things, it's not one or the other. He can be very Venusian in his speech, he can be poetic, he can be a great singer-songwriter, but he can also probably be very quick with his speech and get in a lot of arguments or fights in relationships and things like that as well too, because we see Venus, the karka for the wife in the man's chart with Mars. So fighting, arguing, those things are very prominent in his second house as well too. So he probably has both things going on. Sometimes he's really soft, he's very Venusian, he's very poetic, he's very creative in his speech. Other times he's probably very aggressive and probably angry in his speech as well too, with that Venus-Mars in the second house. It's not one thing, it's not the other thing, it's both things, okay? And then we see Saturn in the second. So this will show that his career is all about the second house, the voice. He's literally a singer, right? And we'll also see that there's probably some restrictions at times to his voice, right? And I saw in this online article that he lost his voice a lot recently. So that's that energy of, Venus is there, great for poetry, great for beauty in the voice, great for singing, great for songwriting, great for creativity. But then we also see Mars and we also see Saturn. So then we also see issues and malefic influence on the second house as well too, right? So it's not one, it's not the other, it is both. It is always both in Vedic astrology. That's how you get accurate in astrology. You have to see both aspects in the chart. All right, so first house lord in the second, 2 malefics, 1 benefic, right? We've seen his life has been a lot of both things happening. All right, let's hop over now to his moon in the 12th house. So, moon in the 12th will often show that someone had some lack of nurturing in their upbringing, right? So moon is in a Moshka house, a house that isn't necessarily the most positive house. Moon in the 12th gives good energy for introspection and spirituality and intuition, things like that, but it doesn't necessarily do a lot of favors for someone's upbringing, right? So the emotional nature is not fully nurtured in some regard. And this is a pretty isolated moon as well too. So in Vedic astrology, there's a yoga called the Kimadruma yoga, which means that a moon is on its own and there's no planets that are second or 12th from the moon. And the way that I was taught in Vedic astrology is that, like, if you have strong planetary aspects onto the moon, it's not a full Kimadruma yoga. Like, for you to actually have a Kimadruma yoga, you would have to have no planetary aspect on the moon. We do see Jupiter aspects the moon, which gives some benefic energy, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we see Jupiter's aspecting that moon, so it's not a full Kimadruma yoga, but I would see this as a pretty isolated moon, which means that growing up, he probably felt isolated, he probably felt strange, he probably felt different than a lot of his peers. He probably had a lot of tumultuous early childhood experiences with that sort of isolated moon, almost making a Kimadruma, but not quite because Jupiter's aspect is on the moon. Isolated moons can also make people a little bit cold emotionally, and I feel like I've seen that when I've kind of watched things about him. He seems a little bit more reserved within his emotions. That's that isolated moon. Moon in the 12th house, people are very introspective, they're very shy, they're very withdrawn, okay? But also the moon is always going to be a place of interest in someone's chart. So because that moon sits in the 12th house, he has an interest in foreign travels, he has an interest in spirituality in some regard, he has an interest in film, photography, television. I believe that, like, one of his first albums, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he did a lot of the photography for one of his first albums. That's the 12th house of film, photography, and television. All right, so we can see that there is some connection very strong for him in that 12th house because the moon is always going to be a place of interest in the chart. All right. So the next thing that I find really eerily spot on is all the malefic influence on the father in Abel's chart. So I get a lot of clients where when I see a lot of negative aspects to the 9th house, negative aspects to the 10th house, negative aspects to the Jupiter in their chart, they are going to have some sort of life experience where the father left them at a young age or the father was not around physically or emotionally, okay? So let's start unraveling how I can see this in Abel's chart. So first thing is we see K2 in the 9th house, okay? K2 is what we get disconnected from, and it creates this sort of void in someone's chart. It's in the 9th house of the father. So that's one strike, right? We see K2 in the 9th. There's some sort of disconnection with the father. The father could be alcoholic, strange. The father could be distant from a distant foreign land, things of that nature with K2 in the 9th, okay? The second thing is we see Jupiter, which is the karaka or the indicator of the father in the 8th house of loss, right? The 8th house is a dhisthana house. So it means that the father was gone, distant, alcoholic, strange. All these themes are heightened as well too. Okay, there's two strikes. The third thing is the sun is the indication of the father. All right, let's go and see Saturn. Saturn is aspecting the sun by its third aspect. So 1, 2, 3. Saturn's aspect on the sun gives us a third strike or a third reason why there are issues with the father in this chart, okay? Saturn's sun aspects will always show that someone has issues with, confidence and security that will stem from, more often than not, the father, right? So there was some disconnection, leaving of the father. Maybe the father had his own addiction issues, things like that. And then Saturn's aspect on the sun, meaning the father was gone, he was distant, he wasn't there, right? So we see it 3 times, which makes it very potent, very powerful. So we see the issues with the father there, okay? Now, I want to show as well, too, how we see that he was very, sort of introspective and shy as a person. And as a performer when he was starting as well too. Okay, so we see that K2 sits here in the 9th, which means that it aspects houses that are 5 houses and 9 houses over. So we start with K2, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, aspects his first house, 6, 7, 8, 9, aspects his 5th house. So K2 aspecting the first will give us the energy of a creative performer who is shy, who is introspective, who is mysterious, who is elusive, and is sort of withdrawn in their energy. So we've seen this in Lana Del Rey's chart, we've seen this in Jim Morrison's chart, we've seen this in Kat Power's chart. Whenever K2 is on the ascendant or aspects the ascendant, we are gonna get artists and performers who are not natural performers, okay? For example, Michael Jackson's chart is the chart of someone who is very much a performer through and through because he has such a strong 3rd house, okay? And then he has benefic influence on his 1st house. So he's able to be performative with a lot of ease, okay? The difference of artists and musicians who have K2 or Saturn aspects onto their 1st house is they're going to be those performers that are more withdrawn. They are more introspective. They are more shy in some regard. So Abel's chart with K2 aspecting the ascendant is the chart of someone who doesn't like the public, doesn't like the spotlight. He doesn't like to be that super performative person by nature, right? You see K2 aspects on the ascendant in musicians' charts. They are those musicians, those artists that take longer to get comfortable performing because K2 with the ascendant or K2 aspecting the ascendant creates this very shadowy, introspective, withdrawn, elusive, mysterious sort of energy, okay? And we do see as well too Rahu in the 3rd with Mercury in a conjunction in the 3rd house. So the 3rd house is the house of performing and the arts and the creative. Rahu with Mercury shows that he would be going towards writing in some regard, right? Because Mercury is the karaka or the indication of writing. Rahu is where we're going in this lifetime. It can really, get someone's soul lit up. So, Mercury in the 3rd house rules writing, 3rd house rules communication, 3rd house rules performing, 3rd house rules courage, 3rd house rules the arts. So it's interesting, right? We have K2 aspecting the 1st, which means he's not a natural performer. He's more introspective, more withdrawn, more shy, all of those things. But then we see Rahu expanding his 3rd house of performing and courage in a conjunction with Mercury. So it shows that he's learning the most and he's actually growing the most when he goes towards his courage and his willpower and his ability to kind of get out there and perform as well too. And Mercury does well in the 3rd house in the sense that it connects to the 3rd house naturally. So it's a really good placement for writers, right? And you will find that when Rahu goes into the 3rd, there can also be, and Mercury's in the 3rd, something about his siblings as well. So I'm not sure if he has siblings, but if he does, there might be either a lot of them or maybe there's something that's really important for him around siblings. So I'm going to look that up after I do this chart analysis as well too. I'm not so sure, but there's something there. Okay. So that's really also interesting, right? It shows us the exact way that he has lived his life, right? He's shy, he's introspective, he's withdrawn, but then he's learning about going towards that performing and writing. And with such a heavy 2nd house of the voice, he is a singer, he uses his voice, even though he's also had issues there. It's both things, right? It's not one, it's not the other, it's all of those things. That's how you are an accurate astrologer. Okay, so I think this is really interesting. So we go over to his D9 Navamsha. He has his 10th house lord in the 5th house with Mercury sitting there. So it means that his career is connected to the arts and the creative. Mercury in the 5th is creative writing, right? Mercury is the karaka or the indication of writing. So 10th house lord in the 5th house, he is creative, he's using his creative talent, and he is writing as well too. Okay? And this is kind of a more advanced Vedic astrology type of lesson, but I want to show you guys something. So when Abel got his fame, he was in about, I want to say it was 2010, okay? So follow along with me here. This is a little bit more high-level Vedic astrology stuff, but I want to show you guys something. So when we go to 2010 in his chart, we might kind of wonder, like, okay, why did he get famous? Let's go here. Let me pull this up. We might wonder why he got famous in a Saturn dasha, right? Because Saturn doesn't really make us think about fame, right? We would expect fame in a Venus dasha, we would expect fame in a Rahu dasha, maybe a Moon dasha. We wouldn't necessarily expect this heightened fame in a Saturn dasha, but I'll show you guys why he got his success in a Saturn dasha, okay? First thing is Saturn is in his second house of the voice and singing, and it's in conjunction with Venus, which shows using his creativity in his career, using the voice, singing, but also there's 2 malefics in the second, so we can't go based off that alone. That's not really enough, right? Here's how we know the reason why he got famous in that Saturn dasha, okay? Let's go to his charts. Let's pull up his Vargas and his D10, okay, his chart of great successes. Saturn sits with Venus in the 10th house. Okay, his 10th house lord is in the 2nd house with Mercury sitting there. And then the 2nd house lord goes into the 10th house. This is so powerful, guys, so powerful. Okay, because, you know, normally we would never intuit this like heightened fame during a Saturn dasha. But because we go into the D10, Saturn, okay, this is what my Vedic astrology teacher would always tell us. When a planet is in the house of a chart that chart rules and someone goes into that dasha, that chart gets active. So the D10 is the chart of great career success. Saturn is in the 10th, so when he goes into a Saturn or a Venus dasha, especially if he goes into a Saturn and then Venus Bhukti dasha, but Saturn or Venus dasha, it's going to highlight and activate this entire chart of career success. So when he went into a Saturn dasha in the 10th house of career in the D10 chart, he got that heightened career success. And it's also in conjunction with Venus, which Venus is the karaka or the indication of career success in creativity as well too. So he got creative career success at the exact time that Saturn highlighted in his dasha sequence, and that D10 gets lit up and it gets activated, okay? And then we also see Saturn sitting with Venus in his D10. We see Saturn sitting with Venus in his D9. We see Saturn sitting with Venus in his D1 as well too. So these 3 charts are really activated with Saturn energy and Venus energy, meaning that Saturn is the karaka for career, Saturn is the karaka for, you know, putting in hard work that kind of manifests. And then Venus is creativity, Venus is money, Venus is creative endeavors. So that Saturn Venus being lit up in all these different charts, really, really powerful, really, really powerful. So when he goes into that Saturn dasha, it's like activating that Venus energy as well too that comes along with it. And it's activating that D10 chart. And then his D10, his chart of great career success, his 10th house lord is in the 2nd house of speech and the voice. So when he goes into that dasha, he uses his voice. He's a singer, quite literally. Okay, it's like that. And we also see the 10th house lord is in the 2nd with Mercury in the 2nd, which is a great benefic. And then we see the 2nd house lord going back into the 10th house. Okay, so do we have, yes, we have a Parivartan yoga. Okay, so that's another element as well too, is we also have a Parivartan yoga between Saturn and Mercury. So Saturn is in Virgo in the D10, Mercury is in Capricorn in the D10, so Parivartan between Saturn and Mercury. So when he goes into a Saturn dasha or a Mercury dasha bhukti, Parivartan yoga gets active in his D10 as well too. So you might initially not really understand why he got this heightened fame in a Saturn dasha, but you have to dig deeper. You have to dig deeper in astrology always. And it's because of that strength of Saturn in his D10, Parivartan yoga. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this chart analysis into Abel's Vedic sidereal astrology chart, how we could see everything. We can see the absence of his father, we can see the issues with confidence and stage presence, and we can also see the issues of addiction and issues with speech, but also a really powerful chart for being a creative, being an artist, being a songwriter, being a singer. All those themes are really highlighted here as well too. All right, and one more thing actually, at Makaraka Venus, you'll see a lot of famous singers and songwriters have their at Makaraka, or their highest degree planet, as Venus. And guess where that Venus is sitting? In his second house of the voice. And he's a singer. He's a creative singer, right? It's that literal, guys, with Vedic astrology. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed. Like, comment, and subscribe for more content coming soon as well. I just love spreading the knowledge of Jyotisha because I really think going forward, it's going to be the system of astrology that you're going to start seeing a lot of astrologers transition to Vedic sidereal astrology. I do really believe that to be true because it's the most accurate and most predictive system of astrology that we do have. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you have such a beautiful, blessed day. We'll talk soon. Love y'all.